Okay, so depth of field, we talked about it a little bit in the last lesson. Let's get deeper into it here. So what is a shallow depth of field? Shallow depth of field is the effect where only a small portion of the image is sharp and in focus, while the areas in front of it and behind it appear blurred out. This effect happens when you use a wider aperture, as well as having that focus point a certain distance away from the foreground and the background. So the wide aperture allows more light to enter the lens, and it results in a reduced depth of field. So photographers often will use this for portraits. If you want to isolate a subject from a background, this is the best way to do it. Macro, you'll see this a lot. You'll see it in birding. You'll see it, like I said, in portraits. Anything where the subject is important and anything else is just extra. If you're doing environmental portraits where the background does matter, the shallow depth of field is going to take away from that, right? So you have to decide when is it crucial to have this and when is it just a choice, or when do you need to have a shallow depth of field. The opposite of that is your deep depth of field. This is where the foreground, midground, background are all pretty sharp and in focus regardless of where that main subject is. You see this a lot in landscape photos, but it's also very useful in documentary photography. There's a lot of portraits that result in, have better results with a deep depth of field. Now this is obviously the opposite, so you want a narrow aperture or bigger number, so something like f8, f9, all the way 22, and that will create this nice focus of foreground, midground, background. Keep in mind that, again, the distance of the background or the foreground also comes into play here. So there are some times where you will use a small aperture, but maybe your background is so far away that it's still a little bit blurry. There's something called focus stacking that we're going to talk about that will help with that. And there are ways to kind of work around this. But generally, just basic practicality. A big wide aperture is going to have shallow depth of field, and a small narrow aperture is going to have deep depth of field. Okay, so read through that, see if you can get that clear in your head. And then you're also going to read about bokeh, which I mentioned in the last video, but you're going to get a little bit more information about what the characteristics of bokeh actually are and why it's something that people try to achieve. So go ahead and read through that, and then we will get into our shutter speed.